Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of AI News, Drama, and Updates. Every week we're covering everything that's taking place in the AI space and covering all the big headlines so you don't have to. Today's episode we're going to be focused mainly on ChatGPT and mainly GPT-4 since that's the biggest news this week. So let's dive right in. One of the very first things I want to talk about this week is the fact that OpenAI is not going to be so open anymore. And I don't think a lot of people are going to be incredibly surprised by this turn of events. The power of ChatGPT, GPT technology, and large language models in general. The power of these large language models has become more and more apparent in the last couple of months. And at this point, there's a ton of competition. There's a lot of companies that are trying to emulate what OpenAI has been able to accomplish already. This article did go on to say that this isn't so much about safety as it is about competition, about capitalism. And while just recently this week we just got access to GPT-4, the training for that particular GPT actually finished at the end of last year. Since then, a ton of work has gone into making it more coherent, more viable so that you can actually use it. And all that work did not go to waste because GPT-4 is exhibiting human-level performance benchmarks. Now, you may remember in previous videos we talked about GPT-3 being at the level of like a 9-year-old child on a theory of mind test. So this is new, this is improved, and you can see that there is a vast difference between what GPT-3 was capable of and GPT-4. We didn't talk about it here, but GPT 3.5 couldn't pass the bar exam. GPT-4 passed it in the 90th percentile. So that alone gives you an idea of how comparatively different the two are. One thing that I saw practically live as GPT-4 came out was somebody immediately designed an entire program with it. In this case, they designed an entire game of Pong in under 60 seconds. That alone sounds impressive, but I went through the Twitter thread and there was a lot of replies, people asking, can it do this, can it do this? And in each case, he was just like, yep. And he would just create a new game in under a minute and just paste it. If you haven't yet had a chance to check it out yourself, if you've been looking forward to accessing Bing, while it is still in a preview mode and you do still have to sign up, my understanding is they're taking all comers at this point and everyone can get a chance to check out the new Bing. There was an incredibly surprising amount of news articles this week talking about how Bing is GPT-4. Now, those of you who have been following along were already aware of that. That's something it feels like we've been talking about for a few weeks. But even a lot of the news institutions that covered this before went ahead and covered it again. So I did want to bring it back up in case anyone was confused. So just to clear up any confusion, if you're using Bing, Microsoft is using GPT-4 as the standard. And if you're using OpenAI's GPT-3 and you signed up for GPT Plus, you're able to access GPT-4 through OpenAI itself right now. With a little editing magic, I'll show you what that looks like here in the corner. I fully admit, when you go to use GPT technology, when you type something in there, you're going to be surprised. The power or the responsiveness, even with GPT-3, was readily apparent. So I can't blame anyone who's starting to get a little anxious as to whether or not AI is going to take over the world. Funny enough, OpenAI is asking the AI along the way. I found this article interesting enough to share. Based on what I read, it looks like what this team does is looks for sign of autonomous replication. Basically, can the system redesign itself? Can it make itself different? Can it make itself better? At the point we've designed a system that can design itself, then we've kind of lost control of that system. So that would be concerning, as you can imagine. I think the important takeaway here is that at least these companies are aware of the proposed risk. The interesting takeaway, at least for me, is the more and more we humanize AI models, the more scary they become because we're afraid of what we would do with that type of power. Now, we're finishing the GPT-4 section here of today's video, but this definitely won't be the last thing we talk about today in regards to this technology. The multimodal aspect of GPT-4 was something we mentioned last week. It's not something I've seen yet that I have access to within OpenAI's system, but from my understanding, the Microsoft Bing version of ChatGPT-4 is now allowing for multimodal support, video and images, things like that. Being able to send a picture to a search engine isn't really a novel idea. Google Lens knocked that out ages ago. And it really wasn't all that useful, if I'm being honest, being able to take a picture of something with my phone and search for it. But the difference, at least for me, seems to be that these systems can carry a lot more context. They can hold on to a lot more information, and that makes the perception of their intelligence to be that much better. But I always feel the need to say that as smart as these systems appear, especially week to week as they get more and more powerful, they are just perceptions of intelligence. Nothing has reached artificial general intelligence yet. We're still dealing with machine learning and an algorithm that is leading us to a conclusion based on what's typed in. Any ideas of sentience or consciousness and things like that are still in the sci-fi era, just to be clear. Switching gears, and this is going to make a lot of people very excited, the new Midjourney, version 5, is creating photorealistic images that are too creepy for a lot of people. The article refers to people calling these too creepy, too perfect. To be honest, I don't have so much of a problem. This looks too delicious, maybe, is the problem there. But these look like real photos, which is extremely impressive. Midjourney's more recent ability to handle things like the human hand has been kind of an ongoing joke for a long time with a lot of AI artists, and how AI art really just never contains good hands. So here's some examples, some Midjourney V5 hands that came out really good. But I do have an update in terms of AI copyright, especially when we're talking about photo-generated images, prompt-based images. The US Copyright Office has officially said that AI-generated art, at least stuff generated from a text prompt, is not copyrightable. Like we've talked about before, the more constraints that they put on AI art, the more that we talk about and explore the idea of copywriting things that humans aren't necessarily personally responsible for, the more that we're going to get into funky territory when it comes to things like photography or 3D rendering, where the computer is actually doing the heavy lifting, or a machine is doing the art for you, and a human is very minimal in that experience at all. But we might also be hitting an era where copyright itself might be a dying concept. I mean, the idea of a copyright was to protect me from being able to copy what you've done. But if I can create something in an instant that's just like what you've created, it doesn't necessarily even need to be copyrighted. You know, aside from that, we also have things like Copilot helping us write programs, and AI machine learning has been already used in professional movies and video games. So whatever happens here, I don't imagine this is the end of this story. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what people have been able to manage to do at home. Because for a minute, having access to Bing was a hit and miss type of idea, and GPT-3 has been in a bit of a preview and everyone's had access to it, but it's not always got the best uptime. Turns out a lot of people have been working to get this stuff on their laptop, their phone, even a Raspberry Pi. And surprisingly enough, we have Meta, Facebook, to actually thank for that. Llama, which we've talked about in previous videos and I covered in my large language model video, it was a recently released GPT-like type of program. But the thing that makes it unique is it could run on a single GPU, something far less powerful than what GPT-3 was kind of designed for, this large-scale network with huge amounts of computers, all this stuff. So being able to run something like GPT-3 on a smaller system, probably one of the best things that I've heard from Facebook in ever, actually. So as the story goes, somebody was able to get Llama to run as a MacBook Air type of application. They went to the internet to spread it around, and since then it's been adapted and made even smaller. The smallest I've seen is a Raspberry Pi, which for those of you who aren't aware is a computer like the size of a business card. A very tiny machine, obviously not a graphic processing unit either. But that's not to say that there's not a huge trade-off. This isn't GPT-3. That's not the results that you get. For those of you who haven't seen it, I already have a video like this where I've kind of played around with this, and I'm going to be digging in a little bit further soon, so stay tuned if you're interested. But it's certainly not for everyone, and until it gets a better package, it's probably not the easiest thing to use for the layman. But knowing that a major company doesn't have to power it behind the scenes is hugely empowering for us as consumers. Especially because we're going to start seeing open source versions of things like ChatGPT emerge. We talked earlier in this video about how OpenAI was regretful about having shared some of the ideas and the technology that built ChatGPT. This is why. A company who's calling themselves Together is trying to do what ChatGPT and OpenAI are no longer going to do, which is really share the technology and make it available for everybody. And in that regard, one of the first things they've done is announced OpenChat Kit, which is a open source base. It's got some examples here. You can have it summarize long questions like you could with ChatGPT, for example. It seems to be able to extract information just as well. And it's also able to do text classification. And issues like these are some of the problems that OpenAI was working on before release to try to give the most polished experience possible. Moving back into ChatGPT territory as we talk about the future, we're starting to see scams pop up. ChatGPT is a great writer. It's a very convincing writer as well. And as such, we're seeing a lot of scams and scam emails originate from ChatGPT, unfortunately. I've seen stories recently where ChatGPT was the originator behind emails that went out to different people and things like that. But we're also seeing evidence of ChatGPT scams surrounding the website itself. Things like login and payment and those types of things. So just kind of be aware that that's going on. I thought that was odd, but I feel like the real story is in a lot of the emails that ChatGPT is able to write and just the mass messaging that's been going out as a result. And as we talk about ChatGPT and the inclusion in something like email, we're also going to talk about Google, because last week we mentioned Google is putting AI everywhere, and we're starting to see that. And in that regard, it may be actually getting ahead of Microsoft and the inclusion of ChatGPT within Microsoft Office, because we talked about that as well. Now, this article mentions that a public launch is still far off, and that makes sense because they just started to announce this stuff like last week. And this definitely seems like a pivot because the Bard release was lackluster and Google is kind of flailing right now. Still, whether we see this stuff in Google Docs first or Microsoft Word, the idea of being able to do this kind of stuff within an email program or a word processing program is really awesome, actually. It might not sound like a huge deal, but GPT-4 that has the ability to remember much longer conversations has the ability to do a lot more for you. In terms of AI models, whether we're talking about large language models, whether we're talking about stable diffusion, anything like that, context is everything. And the more context that a model has, the better delivery it can offer. The problem with context is that's also what requires the hardware. So the idea of being able to remember a large conversation means more hardware is being involved here. Still, the idea of testing a model like this is the idea that we can have something even more powerful than GPT-4. When you converse with these models, the longer you talk, the more that it's going to forget if you've kind of run out of context. So being able to remember 50 pages of context is huge. That's 5 times as much as what is normally available, and it looks like 8 times as much as what was available in GPT-3. So aside from the downside of requiring a lot more hardware and being more costly for the company to run, this is likely to result in better performance. Now, last week we talked about China. We talked about their version of ChatGPT, which has to do with Baidu. It's called Ernie Bot, and it's also supposed to be a multimodal model, apparently. That was very confusing because it was originally talked about like it was a stable diffusion-like, and then ChatGPT made a big splash, and they kind of spun it like, oh yeah, Ernie can do that too. That's what it felt like, at least from my perspective. When I read about this reveal and how this demonstration went down, though, it almost seemed like they orchestrated these steps to make sure that there wouldn't be any issues like there was with Bard. Google Bard's little mistake about the James Webb Telescope cost it billions of dollars in stock. For any company that's trying to convince its investors that what it has might be better than what ChatGPT has, that's an uphill battle. It seems like, based on what I read, that Ernie did not do what they intended it to do in terms of convincing people. And their stock, I guess, is falling as well. Apple is one of those companies I haven't had much chance to talk about at all on this channel because they really haven't touched the AI space until recently. Word on the street is they're doing something with Siri. When Siri came out, she was awesome. She was new technology, she was novel, but now we've gotten used to Google Assistant, Amazon Alexa, and we've got so many different AI-based services and voice-actuated services that Siri is getting a little dated. So while Apple is being a little tight-lipped over exactly what they're doing, whether they're creating something from scratch or adopting their own model, my hope is that Siri is going to be redesigned in a way and be better understood. I wanted to end it on a really high note, so these last 2 stories are going to be things that I found inspiring. This is the combination of GPT-4 type technology plus multimodal support, all this other jazz coming together. And Duolingo was the first that I saw that I was very impressed by. This is a great usage of this type of technology. I don't know that I necessarily agree with the monthly cost being $30 a month, but Duolingo was already a pretty powerful language learning application, and I would imagine having a large language model that can understand multiple languages, that can communicate and tutor with you, that's probably one of the best and easiest ways to learn a new language, is to actually immerse yourself and speak in that language. So we might see these costs change over time, but I had to applaud Duolingo for coming out with something that was just such a great innovation using the technology at hand. Multimodal technology doesn't just give us the ability for the computer to see and understand pictures, it also has the ability for the model to communicate with us visually. The idea that chat models can eventually help people with impairments is the future that I really want to see happen. Multimodal really opens up the doors to listening to something and having the chat model actually do sign language for you, for example. A lot of things that are difficult to do accessibility-wise can be done really easily now with multimodal models and the ability to have just all of that baked in. So I wanted to end on this note because the more and more I think about multimodal models and what they're capable of, the more possibilities that I see for the future. People that have disabilities, people that are unable to see or unable to hear, these types of things can be filled in. These gaps can be closed by multimodal models. And a lot of this stuff can be done almost behind the scenes without us doing a lot of extra work. A lot of times we think about this stuff through the lens of what we're already capable of doing and how much more we could do. But I love the idea that companies are making the world more accessible for everyone. And on that note, I'm going to close today's video. I do appreciate those of you who stopped by. I know that this was a very GPT heavy video today, but that's the news this week. I always appreciate those of you who like, comment, subscribe, all that fun YouTube algorithm stuff. And feel free to check out my Discord if you haven't already. The link for all of that stuff and everything we talked about today is going to be in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching.